The Young and the Restless Spoilers Shock, A Desperate Heart, Sharon's Struggle for Redemption. Sharon sat alone in the dimly lit room, her hands trembling as she clutched her knees to her chest. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of the old floorboards beneath her feet. Despair hung in the air like a suffocating fog, and her mind raced with thoughts she couldn't escape. How had she come to this point? What could she possibly do to change the trajectory of her life? But one thing was certain, she had to be strong. The weight of grief. Sharon's eyes were swollen from countless hours of crying. Her reflection in the cracked mirror showed a woman she barely recognized, a shadow of the vibrant, confident person she used to be. She had spiraled into this pit of despair ever since Heather's death. Accused of murder, with the walls of suspicion closing in, Sharon had become a fugitive in her own mind, unable to trust anyone, even herself. A sound broke through her haze of thoughts, a voice. It was faint but unmistakable. Sharon. Nick's voice cut through the darkness, filled with urgency and determination. Could it be real? She wasn't sure anymore. Her mind often played cruel tricks on her, offering glimmers of hope only to snatch them away. Then the door burst open. Nick appeared, disheveled and breathless, his eyes wild with worry. He didn't wait for her to move, he lunged toward her, grabbing the chain that bound her wrist. "I'm getting you out of here," he said, his voice shaking as he yanked at the chain with all his strength. The metal groaned and eventually snapped. Sharon fell into his arms, her body trembling as tears streamed down her face. Relief washed over her as Nick held her tightly, his presence grounding her in the moment. But how had he found her? And why had he come? The path to rescue Nick had been relentless. When Sharon disappeared, he refused to believe she had simply run away. The evidence against her for Heather's murder was mounting, but Nick knew Sharon's heart. She wasn't a killer. Something else was at play, and he was determined to uncover the truth. He started by retracing Sharon's steps, consulting anyone who might have seen or spoken to her in the days leading up to her disappearance. Michael and Chance had been skeptical at first, arguing that Sharon might have fled to avoid a life behind bars. But Nick refused to entertain the idea. She wouldn't just leave without a word, he had said during a heated meeting at his home. Michael and Chance exchanged uneasy glances, their doubt written all over their faces. If she's innocent, why hasn't she contacted anyone? No calls, no messages, nothing, Michael pointed out. Nick slammed his fist on the table. Because she's in trouble, that's why. She wouldn't cut ties unless she had no choice. Their conversation sparked a critical clue. Chance mentioned an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, a place often used as a hideout by people in desperate situations. Nick's gut told him to check it out. And that's where he found her, alone, chained, and barely holding on. Gratitude and confusion as they stumbled out into the cool night air, Sharon looked at Nick with a mixture of love and guilt. She owed him everything, her freedom, her sanity, but she knew better than to let her emotions cloud her judgment. "Nick, I can't thank you enough," she whispered, her voice cracking. "But we can't do this. You can't keep risking everything for me." Nick cupped her face in his hands, his eyes searching hers. "You mean everything to me, Sharon. I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe." Her heart ached at his words. She loved him deeply, but she couldn't ignore the reality of their situation. Heather was dead, and Sharon was the prime suspect. No amount of love could erase the evidence pointing to her. The nightmare revealed Sharon jolted awake, her heart pounding. The room was quiet, and Nick was nowhere to be seen. It had all been a dream, a cruel illusion created by her desperate mind. She was still alone, still hiding, and still haunted by the accusations against her. Miles away, Nick sat in his living room with Michael and Chance, deep in conversation. Theories were thrown back and forth, each more frustrating than the last. If she didn't kill Heather, why hasn't she come forward to clear her name? Michael asked, his tone laced with skepticism. Chance leaned forward. Maybe she's scared. If she's innocent, she might not trust the system to protect her. Nick rubbed his temples, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. She has to contact someone eventually. She wouldn't just disappear without a plan. A glimmer of hope. Sharon, still lost in her thoughts, knew she couldn't stay in hiding forever. She had to find a way to prove her innocence, but how? The world believed she was guilty, and even she had begun to question her own memory of that fateful night. But deep down, she knew the truth. She hadn't killed Heather. Someone else had set her up, and she had to uncover the real killer before it was too late. As the first rays of dawn crept through the cracks in the wall, Sharon made a silent vow. She wouldn't let despair consume her. She would fight for her life, her freedom, and the chance to reunite with the people she loved. Somewhere out there, Nick was still searching for her, and she had to believe that their paths would cross again. Until then, she would hold on to hope, no matter how faint it seemed. The story of Sharon's redemption was far from over. With love, determination, and the truth on her side, she would find her way back, one step at a time. A battle of wills, Jordan, Ian, and the race against time. The tension in the room was palpable as Jordan and Ian Ward stood face to face, their voices rising with every exchange. The once civil partnership between them had dissolved into a bitter power struggle, with neither willing to back down. Their arguments were relentless, each one chipping away at the fragile dynamic they had maintained for far too long. Jordan's breaking point. Jordan's hands balled into fists at her sides, her eyes blazing with anger. Ian's arrogance had pushed her to her limit. He dismissed her opinions as though they were trivial, treating her as a mere pawn in his grand schemes. "I've had enough of this, Ian," she shouted, her voice shaking with fury. "You don't listen to anyone but yourself. You act like you're the king of the world, but newsflash, you're not." Ian smirked, leaning back in his chair with an air of superiority. "Let me remind you, Jordan, who's in charge here. I make the decisions, and you follow them. That's how this works." "That's not how I work," she snapped. "I have a voice, and I won't let you silence it." The argument spiraled further out of control, with neither willing to concede. It was a clash of egos, a battle of wills, and the cracks in their alliance were now impossible to ignore. Sharon's deteriorating condition. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit corner of the same building, Sharon sat huddled against the cold, damp wall. Her once luminous eyes were now hollow, her body frail from days without food or water. Her strength was waning, and her mind drifted in and out of clarity. The weight of her circumstances pressed heavily on her, and she could feel herself slipping away. "Someone, anyone, please," she whispered weakly, her voice barely audible. But no one came. Sharon needed help, desperately. Without nourishment or care, her body would soon give out. She clung to the faint hope that Nick would find her in time, but as the hours dragged on, that hope grew dimmer. Nick's desperate search miles away, Nick was relentless in his search for Sharon. He couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that she was in danger, that every passing second brought her closer to the brink. His mind raced with possibilities. Where could she be? Who could have taken her? And most importantly, would he find her before it was too late? He had traced her last known movements to Ian Ward, a man with a history of manipulation and deceit. Nick knew that wherever Ian was, trouble wasn't far behind. He also suspected that Jordan, Ian's conflicted associate, might hold the key to Sharon's whereabouts. Nick pressed harder, reaching out to contacts, following leads, and piecing together the puzzle. His determination was fueled by his love for Sharon and the unbearable thought of losing her. He had to find her. Failure was not an option. The confrontation reaches a boiling point back at the hideout. Jordan and Ian's confrontation reached its peak. Jordan had had enough of Ian's domineering ways, and her anger boiled over. "You're going to regret underestimating me," she said, her voice cold and steady. "I'm done letting you control everything." Ian laughed, but there was a hint of unease in his eyes. He underestimated Jordan's resolve, dismissing her as someone who wouldn't dare to stand up to him. But Jordan was no longer the person she had been when she first got involved with him. She was stronger now, and she wasn't afraid to fight back. As their argument escalated, neither noticed the faint sound of footsteps approaching the building. A race against time. Nick arrived at the location with his heart pounding in his chest. He had tracked down Ian's hideout, and though he wasn't sure what he would find, he knew Sharon had to be here. He moved cautiously but quickly, his every sense on high alert. He found the source of the shouting first. Peering into the room, he saw Jordan and Ian locked in a heated argument. He didn't have time to deal with their drama, his priority was Sharon. Nick moved through the building, calling out her name. "Sharon. It's me, Nick. Where are you?" His voice echoed through the empty halls, and for a moment there was no response. Then, faintly, he heard a weak voice call out, "Nick." He followed the sound, his heart aching at how fragile she sounded. When he finally found her, he was horrified by what he saw. Sharon was pale and gaunt, her body trembling with weakness. He rushed to her side, gathering her into his arms. "Sharon, I'm here," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've got you. You're safe now." A glimmer of hope as Nick carried Sharon out of the building. Jordan appeared in the hallway. Her face softened when she saw Sharon's condition, and for a moment, her anger at Ian was overshadowed by concern. "I didn't know," Jordan murmured, her voice laced with guilt. "I didn't know she was here." Nick didn't have time to respond. He needed to get Sharon to safety and ensure she received the care she so desperately needed. As the night gave way to dawn, the weight of everything that had happened hung heavy in the air. Sharon's recovery would be long and arduous, and the battle against Ian Ward was far from over. But for now, she was safe, and that was all that mattered. For Nick, the fight wasn't over. He would do whatever it took to protect Sharon and bring those responsible for her suffering to justice. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: Nick would never give up on Sharon, not now, not ever.